I think we will get started. It really is so awesome to see so many people dialing in from so many places, um, and be here for this discussion. For those that don't know me, my name is Jamie McIver. I'm based in Melbourne, and as well as Sam, actually, we're both based in Melbourne. Originally from New Zealand, though. My role here, I'm part of the adaption team, and I look after the Australian business, which is a lot of fun. First thing I want to do is to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands that we're dialing in from here in Australia, but I think really for everybody all over the world. I think it would be great for us to acknowledge that overall. For me, I'm on the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, which is sort of around the Bay Area of Melbourne. So I'd like to acknowledge those custodians, traditional owners, and pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And yeah, as I say, all of the traditional owners and custodians for wherever people are dialing in from. Also, just to acknowledge that in New Zealand, I know Aotearoa New Zealand, we're celebrating Matariki at the moment, which is the Māori New Year. I was very, very privileged last night to be invited by our partners at the New Zealand High Commission, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, to an event, a celebration here in Melbourne, where we celebrated Matariki. But what I really loved about that was that they invited some of the Aboriginal elders along to the event. So there's this incredible fusing of the Māori culture and the Indigenous Australian cultures, and it was a really great learning experience for me. It was about coming together and sharing knowledge, wisdom, food and drinks, obviously, as well as part of it. And there was one thing that really stood out for me that I thought might be just worth mentioning today. As the elders from both the Māori and the Aboriginal side spoke, what we learnt was that there is a really in common tradition and belief around knowledge and wisdom, that it is fundamentally collective. So knowledge is collective. It's not about what we know as individuals. It's about what we bring together. And if we look at the Indigenous Australian cultures, this is the oldest living culture on Earth, about 65,000 years. So it's quite amazing to think how they have adapted, something we'll be talking about today, over such an incredible period of time, as well as surviving, colonialism and continuing to play such an important role in the country that we're part of. And I just thought it linked really nicely to today, what we're here for. So I want to welcome all of you in the spirit of collective knowledge and sharing wisdom. So we're going to share a lot. So I know you're here thinking you're listening, but I really want you to think about what you might like to contribute as well, whether that's on the chat as we go through, or keep an eye on that. And we really want to sort of keep some room towards the end as well to bring in some questions and discussion as part of it. So it's not just a one-way thing. It's about sharing and building that wisdom together in the spirit of what's been happening for many tens of thousands of years. So on that note, I'd love to introduce Sam Fernando. Sam is learning and leadership development leader for Asia Pacific at Aurecon. One of our really important, as an organization, one of our really important collaborators, clients and partners. So really great to have you here, Sam. I'll let you introduce what we're going to talk about. I'm curious.
Thank you. Thanks so much, David. And thank you for that beginning as well. As you were talking there, I was actually drawing circles, and it kind of reminded me of so much of the design of our leadership development interventions, certainly or connections at Aurecon, is all about how do we kind of create more circles in the organisation of the coming together of the collective wisdom I was really fortunate many, many years ago to do a training, and I remember this wisdom that stayed with me from the get-go, and that is, Sam, always walk into a room expecting the wisdom is already there before you've arrived. And your role is to think about how you can kind of bring that to life or bring that out. So thank you for that. It just it touched me, and I think we are all just part of this continual sort of lineage of knowledge and wisdom that it's time for us to remember ourselves and connect back to. So, yeah, so I'm really keen to have a chat and share with you today some of the thinking that we've been doing, certainly around, for me, I've been doing quite a lot of, I guess, thinking about the concept of leadership. I have been in leadership development now for many, many years. I've worked across multiple professional services organisations, from legal through to management consultancy. Had my own consulting business there for a short period of time, and then engineering. And obviously leadership development has been a critical kind of component of that. I think I did get to a position a number of years ago where I was a bit disillusioned with the way, it was sort of heading, and it made me sort of think about the kind of the system of leadership, and we talk about that quite a lot at Aurecon, the ecosystem of leadership. And yes, we do absolutely focus on, kind of the traditional kind of hierarchical levels of development. But increasingly more so, we're really leaning into this concept of self-leadership. And I really wanted to sort of share with you some of the evolution of that today, and where that's sort of leading into our work. But for me, it sort of started to really touch I guess, a social impact kind of connection, that in this world, and the increasing, we all keep talking about the increasing complexity, and the absolute need for adaptability as humans. I kind of then started to think more about, then what do we all need to do as individuals? How do we need to develop ourselves and our leading our own lives and ourselves to have agency for how do we adapt accordingly into this, what I often really refer to as the big washing machine. And so if I'm not connected to my inner kind of true north, I'm going to be at the whim of all of the external forces. So that's a bit of a big intro, Jamie, but I think that's just more about where my kind of thoughts and passions are leading to me into this world of self-leadership, and how do we build a greater sense of agency for all of our employees to be able to lead their own careers ultimately at Aurecon.
Awesome. No, really good introduction. I think there's two big things. Well, one thing I just want to say, I love that idea that you mentioned around the leadership ecosystem. I wrote that down. One thing that spoke to me there was, I think a lot of the leadership architectures that we've been seeing traditionally are quite linear, hierarchical, and structured. If you know what I mean, I
Yep.
can already imagine that triangular thing with the lines through it. Well, we got that group and that group, and that no longer fits the reality of how organizations work. We're getting flatter organizations. Actually, a lot of the decision making and complexity is being pushed down. And so this idea of an ecosystem, which for me feels a lot more flexible, there's life to it, really spoke out. So I think it's a really nice way to look at it. Then the other thing that I just sort of saw there was the weaving together of these two concepts: self-leadership, self-empowerment, and then adaptability. And we are having so many conversations about adaptive leadership. And when you really dig into that, and I just want to acknowledge, by the way, the work of Dr. Ron Heifetz, obviously, just to reference and credit that for those who may not be familiar with some of that theory. But they're really well interwound, aren't they? Because the whole idea of adaptive leadership is about that you're unlocking challenges and navigating challenges that just haven't been addressed before. There's no body of knowledge or playbook that you can go to. By its very nature, you're stepping into the unknown. And if you don't
Absolutely.
step into accountability, what are you supposed to do if you can't step into a position of accountability?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I really think that as much as we can indicate sort of trends of where things may be heading, the truth is, the ultimate truth is we'll never know what's happening around the corner.
Yeah.
It is just the reality of life. And so how do we kind of create the capacity for my ability as a human being to adapt no matter where life kind of throws me into sort of the curves and the joys, the roller coaster of life. How can I really be a strong, uh, you know, uh, strong no matter what that presents to me. So I think that, and we're sort of, I think I just wanted to pick up on the ecosystem piece as well. I think one of the things I've been really fortunate enough to do is study a little bit, a real little bit, around regenerative leadership, and the idea of, which sounds silly when I say it out loud, that an organization is an ecology. Um, where some of the, well, I've got a couple of my team I think on here, and I kind of go, at best human beings are just a little bit of evolved bacteria. We operate in similar sort of ways to ecology,
Yeah.
and yet we've created this sort of mechanistic sort of structure over organizations and kind of
Mm.
tried to make ourselves believe that that's how an ecological system will work and thrive.
Yeah.
And I think where we're leaning into now is realizing that actually we need to sort of really step much more broadly into this sense that we are an ecology. Things die and things grow, and there's always that evolution that's happening at all times. And so, how do we help our organisations and our team members within that kind of realize that truth? And then also say, but that's okay because we can build our internal capacity to be able to adapt, and evolve within that.
Yeah. No, totally. And something that stood out about your comment earlier on, you talked about you never know what life is going to throw at you. And it gave me the impression that you were talking about, you were taking accountability to look at more than just what happens in the workplace. Could you tell us a bit more about that, what your philosophy approaches around how you might treat people and their portfolio of life, and work within that? How do you think about that?
Yeah, look, and I think, well, I mean, we're always looking for a label, but I think an integrated life is more something that I'd refer to rather than something that's separate. I am old enough to have grown up in the era where I was literally told by my boss, when you come through those swivel doors, Sam, you can leave all that outside and
Yeah.
not bring that inside. Well, that was a big great myth, that was even possible. So I think it's more, how do we kind of assume the integrated life? And certainly at Aurecon, I'm super proud around the ways of working, that obviously COVID sort of sparked and activated for most organisations, but we have
Yeah.
absolutely stayed with that. So we have team manifestos. So you work out with your team what's the right way for you to have a healthy integrated life. And that's something that we hold very dear and with pride through our culture as well.
Awesome. Awesome. And you mentioned too around in an ecology, things live and things die, or things are born, things live, things die. The interesting, not to dwell on death, but
Mm,
it brings to mind the word loss for
yep,
me. That when things die, and whether that's the way we used to do things, whether that's what I used to identify with as part
correct.
of what I did, it brings loss, right? How prominent is that in this idea of self leadership in terms of how you might help people to be better equipped to, I don't know, expect loss
Mm.
and actually deal with it and process it? Because it's not easy.
It's not easy, and I think it's just around. I mean, there's no simple answer to that as well. I think it is very much around open, honest conversations. And I will put my hand up as well and say we have a very long way to go because we have, a couple of 100 years of organisational established life to kind of combat against, I guess. But open and honest about the truth of life and truth of work, and one of the things that we kind of talk about and expect in even at our Leadership Foundations level program as well is we talk about the system of market system, organization system, and human system. And it's really important that everyone enters into our organization and takes their own kind of lens to what's happening out in the world. And how might my own area of technical expertise be changing? Particularly now, if we think about AI, we all have to lean into the reality, including myself and my own team, which we're doing right now. Learning and development obviously is significantly going to be impacted by the opportunities that exist with AI. It's much more about leaning into that and being truthful about that this is present, rather sort of denying that sort of truth as well. So I think it's around honesty and openness, and also where you're getting your sources of truth from as well. So seeking multiple perspectives, which is obviously one of the adaptive leadership practices as well, is really critical, and not just relying on one source of truth to think. And I think that's the way organisational life used to be, certainly in the professional services firms that I've worked in the past, was you entered into it as a graduate, and don't worry, you'll get told what to do, and where to go throughout the kind of the linear career that you've chosen and been anointed with. That is absolutely no longer the truth. And so for us, it's about being really clear, open, and honest. And certainly, that's our intention from our leadership as well.
Yeah. So maybe I might just unpack a little bit more the adaptive leadership concept for people that are less familiar with it. But it's very simple to talk about and to describe. Actually, it's the doing it that gets hard. But the theory being around that there are technical challenges. These are challenges that we encounter, that we there are the answers. Either we have them as experts, or there are experts are out there. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't necessarily need the same type of leadership or innovation, because there's a known solution. And then adaptive is when we're sort of standing on the shoreline of uncertainty, as they say, looking out into the unknown. So these are challenges that take us out of the body of known practice, out of known playbooks, and require us to learn by doing it. You can only do something, you can only achieve something, face into a challenge if you're learning. And I think your point earlier on then around, Sam, around how that's something that we come up against at work. It's stuff that we come up against at home. And interestingly, your point here too now around careers, much less linear, much less, although, well, you did this degree, you're now a lawyer, good luck, this is what your career looks like. This is all changing so rapidly. And an organization like Aurecon too, where you're dealing with some of your people, and I've worked with a number of your people through some of our programs, what strikes me is how wicked, if I can use that term, some of the challenges that they're working on with and for clients. What's really standing out for you at the moment in terms of, really, if we look at the adaptive challenges, what are some of the things that they're running into that they're needing to work together to solve? What might be some examples?
Oh, that's a biggie. I mean, it's actually, I don't want to favour actually any one area of our organisation, but I mean, I think I think about even our industry and how that's forcing great adaptive sort of change as well. I think one of the things that we were pretty clear on the last decades and before, that certainly in Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Asia as well, that the big build Australia, as we called it, was very well determined about what the large infrastructure projects would be across the landscape. That has changed significantly across Australia and New Zealand in particular. And where we're moving into now is obviously energy resources, and the opportunities there is for net zero, the target for net zero. there's huge complexity in that work, humongous complexity. And some of the things, if I sit down and talk with some of our engineers, one gentleman who was on one of our legacy programs said, Sam, it was really clear, 5 years ago that when I sat down with my client, I knew who my client was. My client was an engineer, spoke my language. We were able to sort of define the project, and everyone sort of knew what was happening where and how and when. Now, I might be talking to a corporate social responsibility individual. I might be talking to someone about native title acts. I might having to be talking to community liaison officer. Like, the complexity of even the client system that our individuals are engaging with now for some of these mega projects, particularly around energy transition, are huge. And the actual client constitution shifted as well, from being predominantly government to consortiums, every known kind of element coming in there as well, let alone the actual projects that they're working on and the complexity of the projects that are working on as well. So even we talk, some of our major project directors now, the complexity of having to deal with, highly political, but also let's say not so favourable individuals in the construction industry, that the level of complexity of what these individuals are having to deal with as leaders now, way beyond what we've ever experienced before. So, I think certainly all the narrative came in, probably a decade ago. There was some great books saying, this is what's coming, 10 Years to Midnight. If you haven't read it, by Blair Shepherd, the global PwC strategist, was, predicting this well over a decade and a half ago, that this was coming. And now it's all here in real life. And so it is absolutely forcing us to think about a different way of thinking about leadership, and in particular self-leadership, and how do people, every individual, have self-agency in this new world.
Yeah, totally. So what's interesting there is, while there are clearly some very complex external challenges that we need to look at, we have a saying, and I can't actually recall who coined this phrase, but when we look at adaptive problems, those with the problem are part of the problem
100%.
and part of the solution as well. So we've got to involve the people who have the problem. Brings us a little bit to you mentioned around the inner work, right? And I think this is a big realization that you can see, that while the external problem that we need to solve may be more technical, still complex, but technical, it's actually that inner work. Well, how do I need to be different? How do I need to show up differently in order to be able to take the perspective, bring people together to solve that problem? I know one of the things that people will be really interested to hear about that Aurecon are doing is using the inner development goals. When I get a breather, I'll put it into the chat if someone doesn't beat me to it. The inner development goals, which is really aimed at that, isn't it? To help people to look inside for answers and change, rather than only looking at what's happening outside them. How are you guys using that?
Yeah, so I'm super excited to share with anyone that hasn't already sort of discovered it. But yeah, coming at that time where I was reflecting at the start, when I said I was really sort of a bit disillusioned with what was happening in leadership development in particular, I, my team will laugh at me. I get onto the web and I do big searches, and I go into all the rabbit warrens necessary, and almost like some form of magic, I was sort of delivered this link to the inner development goals. So they've been in operation now, I'm going to get this wrong, but probably 5+ years. And they were born about through, I guess, frustration, if I can call it that. There's a whole background in you can research as well, which I'm happy to share with you because I did a lot of research around it. That why were, after 11 years of the implementation of the UN sustainability goals, were they flatlining? They weren't seeing any major sort of traction around these kind of goals, even though everyone would look at these goals and say, yep, we definitely agree to them. Yes, they're definitely something that, that we want to aspire to. And so they brought together some pretty formidable people in our realm. So as I understand it, sort of Bill Torbett, Robert Keegan, Jennifer Garvey-Berger, oh gosh, I'm going to miss some very important people. Otto Sharma, Sengi, the greats, I think, and they brought together a crew of people to think about, what's sort of happening with leaders who are not able to. Everybody says I'm leaning into this and I'm up for it, but what's actually happening and stopping our leaders from across the world, across the globe, really connecting to this. And this is where they kind of created what's called the IDGs, the Inner Development Goals, which is a leadership development framework, 5 dimensions, 23 skills, and continually evolving. So every year there's a global survey that goes out with the IDG community, which is now like growing ridiculously. And people have their contribution to it. And more recently, they've added in some Indigenous wisdom, which was certainly something that was missing from the original piece. So the IDG framework is something that we fell in love with as soon as we sort of discovered it. And so much so that we actually said we don't actually need an Aurecon leadership development framework. That is it. With that, so we've created a model where we call the inner sort of practices, which are the IDGs, and we also then talk about context, which I mentioned before, which is market, organisation, and human system, and that together forms the Aurecon Leadership Development Framework. And these IDGs underpin every one of our programs. So it's not only the IDGs, but it is the foundation for all of our leadership development experiences. But really speaking to that leadership happens from the inside out. And that's really our kind of really big, I think, mindset shift, which so far, whenever we sort of introduce that this is the decision that we've made, what I love the most is when I see, senior engineers say, I'm really proud that we've decided to join something that's a global movement rather than just something that's unique to us.
I really love that. Kudos to you guys, Sam, at Aurecon for what you've done. From a distance, I've got a little bit of involvement in the IDGs. What I notice is that it's something with enormous potential, something ready to be unlocked, but there are still a lot of people sort of in the room going, I love it, I don't know what to do with it. And we've actually had a lot of people on the call might resonate with them. I think we did a global chat and we had Alana Robertson involved about it. So people want to learn more, that's something to refer to. But what I really respect about Aurecon is actually stepping into it and saying, well, we don't know exactly how this is going to work, but let's try some stuff. And we've just recently revamped one of the programs that we work with you on it, brought in a development goals. I'm looking forward to being part of the launch of that in a week or two. But it's about stepping in, and it's the essence of an adaptive challenge. How do we make this work? Well, we'll only find out in retrospect once we take the first move. So
I'm glad you say that, Jamie, because I often say, this is why it's hard for us to find partners. And I'm just giggling because I know a couple of my team might be on this call. But, whenever we engage with a partner, I would say we are probably going to be the most annoying clients that you have, because exactly that we practice iterative design. We practice adaptive design in our leadership development. And so sometimes it's really hard for people to say, can you give me an agenda and can you give me the flow? And I'll say, we'll give you a straw dog, but we're going to be deeply listening to the system, and we reserve the right to adapt the design of every program as the external, kind of environment shifts, or if the group, the wisdom in the room needs something else to emerge. And so, for us facilitators that we engage with are highly skilled at adaptive facilitation, highly skilled.
Awesome. A really good segue into something I sort of had on my list. I was wanting to talk about if we had time, and we do. So, and that's about what does this all mean for leadership development? A lot of the people that we've got on the call today are coming from that perspective. They're somehow responsible for building programs. So what does this all mean? I'm thinking about a quote from Corey Criswell from our America's team, Chief Leadership Officer there, recently said, it's becoming an unprogrammed program. And the idea that leadership development by its very nature is an adaptive challenge. So when we go in wedded to a plan, wedded to a structure, before we've begun to engage people and find out what is important to them in their context, how could we possibly, I mean, obviously we do co-design up front, but the world is changing so rapidly that the approach to actually designing needs to shift. And that's a little bit what I'm hearing and what you're saying. It's the word coming out for me is vulnerable. I know from my own experience. I know you said you might find yourselves to be the most annoying partner. I wouldn't use annoying. I think and I love it. I love working with people that will take us to a vulnerable space and challenge us, create some heat where we don't quite know where this is going to go, but let's lean into that.
Mm.
How do you actually build that culture internally?
Yeah, well, I think we have to be at first as leadership development practitioners. I think that actually feeling it, and again, there's a lot of time where I can't actually give a structure right now. And so, for example, we have a program that we're still sort of tinkering with. We tinker all the time. I always laugh. My childhood nickname was Tinkerbell, and I find that it's actually something I'm really more coming into growth around as I get older. That I love. I tinker more, but it's not tinker for the sake of tinkering. It's tinkering because I'm listening to what's happening in the system and what's really being called for right now. And I think I'm really fortunate if I have a chief people officer as well that actually really, really embraces that. And I will acknowledge that I have worked with chief people officers in the past that don't like that, who want and I just also want to say that this is not a lay down misère easy show here. It's hard work. We're constantly sort of evolving and shifting what it looks like. I will say that we start with, though, this is a bit of my terminology, a bit of a comfortable shop front. There is an organisational system that we work in. We can't deny that has its expectations of the pyramid that you talked about, Jamie. We definitely have that. And so we design quite deliberately to have that shop front that looks familiar. But then we're quickly very open around where we're actually going to explore from an inner to an external sort of perspective. We do talk about vertical development and horizontal development, although we've recently discovered that vertical development has been picked up somewhere else. So we're just working with a bit of the languaging around that. But I guess that's an example of how we're constantly evolving. Sometimes we test language and we're saying that's not resonating. We need to find another way to describe this or help people, lead people to understand this. Particularly in engineering set as well, we make a decision very early on. We call ourselves model agnostic, because engineers love to get into a model and say my model's better than your model. We don't go there at all. We want to kind of really get to the rawness as much as we possibly can. So we do have a design flow. We do have from the moment you enter as a graduate, we have the build of leadership development, but within that we have the ability to really stretch the edges and the boundaries. And certainly Nick Petrie's work has been very, very helpful in guiding us from long ago, in understanding sort of vertical and horizontal development and heat experiences. So we use all of that methodology that I know Adeption do as well, to describe the type of learning experience that we're going to go through with leadership development. And that we spend a bit of time on up front, because people that enter into our leadership development programs most often have come from very traditional I'm expecting to be given the the learning handed down to me. And so actually really sitting in heat experiences and trying and experimenting for yourself takes a bit of learning to relearn learning. I'm not sure which way the lingo goes, but we have to we're spending a lot of time on that learning to learn again.
Yeah. Mate, there's a few things here that are really coming together for me. We talked a bit about this disruption that's happening and this complexity outside. We can't hope to deal with that unless we also disrupt internally, right? Just
100%.
makes sense. Doing the same old thing won't help us to solve new things. So we've got to disrupt internally in order to cope with a disrupted world. What I really liked about what I heard from you was about how you go about disrupting. And that's a little bit, if I can, my words, not yours, but meet people where they're at so they can connect to something familiar. Don't throw everything up in the air.
Yep.
Enable them to connect with something that's a bit familiar. They've got their stable base, and then disrupt from there and throw them into but just sort of gently then start to pull them. But it reminds me of what I often find myself talking to people in L&D roles about is that what people want isn't necessarily what they need.
Mm.
And sometimes that's where the courage comes in, right? And
Yeah.
vulnerability. And to Kimberly's point and her comment here, actually, vulnerability is a very important source of trust. If we're able to be vulnerable with each other, it really enables us to create bonds based on trust. So I think that's really, really important. So meeting people where they're at, but not holding them there, sort of pushing them a little bit out of the comfort zone into a more disruptive, more of a heat space. And then our job in learning and development is about how do we help them navigate that uncomfortable space? Reassure them that you're in the right place. If it hurts a little bit, good. It's supposed to. It's not supposed to be. It's not about retreating back to comfort. So
It's interesting. One of the other programs which I hold up as my most beautiful program that we run is we call it our Legacy Leadership Program, and it is so our belief as well is that your leadership development, your career development never ends. Doesn't matter how long you're here. And so our last program we actually had our outgoing CEO as a participant on the program, which was wonderful. But I think for us, one of the things that we started with it's not over. Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just the beginning, actually. It's just the next beginning. And that was a really interesting sort of when we talk about putting out the shop front, people were really, really vulnerable to even show up because they were worried. I think it's fair to say that it was some form of an outplacement program or something like that. Um, our work, and again, I work with such wonderful facilitators, understand that our work primarily and first and foremost is to hold a safe space, hold a space and put all of the care and integrity into creating that space, and then take people on the journey of where they need to go with some very good structure, but I call it, kind of loose, tight structure around how to take people through that. I can honestly say we've now had nearly 50 through this program now. It's amazing where people will go when you put as much energy into that space creation as you do the enormous amount of content that we can throw at everyone and anyone, right? I would say content's everywhere, right?
totally.
Content is no longer our problem.
No, totally. It's about the helping people to understand their context. And that's one of the big challenges we also see with adaptive and technical challenges is leaders will misdiagnose. They'll look at the challenge and they will retreat to the comfort of technical challenge. They'll misdiagnose it. We see that in, we've got different stats from different clients, but one client, not Aurecon, by the way, it's over 60% of leaders will misdiagnose, particularly if they're in that achiever expert stage. For those that are familiar with the vertical stages, where people are getting into redefining, they're more likely to be able to identify challenges as adaptive. I'm going to go into the first question here we've got from Ian. And while we're doing that, I'll just invite other people to have a think about what is coming up for you, whether it's something that you'd like to share in terms of wisdom or a question that you've got. So I'll just go into the first question from Ian here. How do you deal with the meeting place of the spiritual inner work and the work life in an essentially materialistic world? So this meeting of this materialistic world that we're in, and what Ian's, I think, rightly identifying as quite sort of almost spiritual inner work that needs to be done.
Yeah, so Ian, I make a point where I avoid the word spiritual, but I'm definitely in that space myself. I'm definitely holding that space. Um, I think I think one thing I try importantly to do is, you know, is to not say that is what the space is, because for some it's not. For some it's
Yeah.
not going to be there, but it's always, I mean, if I just take the example of the Legacy Leadership Program, we run over a 3-day experience. Most definitely some people may go there, and most definitely a lot of people won't. And will stay very sort of tactical and grounded. But it's about being able to ensure that the full breadth is available if people are willing and able. I think it must be about choice. I definitely have been, part of leadership development experiences back in the olden day where, we push people to edges, which wasn't our role to do. And so duty of care for me is hugely, hugely important. So one thing that we do on programs that we do know the spirit may kind of be accessible to people is we always have a psychologist
Right.
on site. That is again our duty of care as designers, that we always make sure that that's available for
Yeah.
individuals. And I would say, the more I expect that we lean into these IDGs, the more that I think that that will be a necessity as well. Um, we've often had people say to us, I get a little bit emotional, I've never felt such care and support before. And I think that's just professional services generally, and that's not alone for Aurecon. I've worked at PwC and Clayton Utz and various sort of big places that often these individuals, highly technical professionals, have been on a bit, on a trajectory, not stopped. And these spaces create some space for stopping and thinking and listening to self.
Yeah.
That can definitely open up spaces for people. But yeah, so answering your question, I don't use the word spirit, but I definitely am always aware I think it's in the room. But we always create a safe space for people to have an outlet if that kind of emerges for them.
So it speaks a little bit to, again, different people probably wanting to explore things in a different way, depending on what they identify with. There's a question here from Daljit to around whether you take a systems approach to the self. Once again, I imagine that might be relevant for some people on depending where they're at on their journey, maybe less so for others. But what are your thoughts on that?
I'm awfully sorry, you won't believe it, but I've just been told I'm going to be updated. My machine's going to be updated at 9:03 a.m. and it won't let me. I'm so sorry. Oh my God. So this is the world giving me an adaptive challenge right in the. I don't. I'm going to keep going, and hopefully it doesn't. It says 9:03 a.m. It's going to finish. So
Yeah.
sorry. Could you say
Hopefully
that
we'll
again?
be okay. But it's
Yes.
okay.
I'm
It is
so
quite funny
sorry.
because at the beginning, before everyone came on screen, we were talking about how the technology always lets us down. It's never the people issues; it's the technology. So
I've never seen this message before as well. So
yeah,
sorry about that, everybody.
no, that's all right.
Can you say
Very
that
much.
again, Jamie?
Maybe an interesting sort of connection there might be the work around the vertical stages. You mentioned with the
Mm.
inner development, the work of Torbit, Keegan, etc. You obviously, you bring the vertical development angle into this. how do you connect the stages, or what do you observe in terms of how different vertical stages, for those that are familiar with it, we'll attach references for those that may not be, but how that might connect to technical and adaptive?
So I think the important thing to note for us, the work that we've decided to do with vertical is, as we say, we hold it lightly. So we know it's a very different diagnostic approach. And I guess that really the first thing for people to understand is that mindsets inform behaviors. And so we're taking people on a journey to understand that, and then we can kind of introduce VMI or stages assessments to help people understand that for themselves. So one of the things that we've obviously done with adaptation is underpin that, and again, just holding it lightly. Here's an introduction to a layer of your onion that you may not be aware of, and this may help you understand, where you are from, your maturity of stage of thinking. But we don't hold it as much as possible with hierarchy, which is why we love Jan Rybeck, who really helps articulate this in a way that's not too confronting. What it is showing us, though, is interestingly, our organisation we've had over 1,000 people, I think, go through that. Um, and again, just as part of the program, it's not a pre-test or a post or anything like that that you used to do in the old diagnostics world. It's just, isn't this interesting about me? We are seeing that our centre of gravity at an organisation is higher redefining rather than expert achiever, which was interesting to us because obviously, if you understand the world of stages, that it says that a number of organisations like us might be sitting in that expert achiever place. The exciting thing about that is, we have a very awesome opportunity to really express our purpose in the world, and our purpose, bringing ideas to life for the planet and people, is really at the center of an engineer's heart. Like, they really do create for the good of the greater. So that's been fantastic to us. One of the things that I think is interesting to also explore is also the potential shadow side of understanding your center of gravity. And we definitely talked to Nick Petrie about this. If you are not authentic with your purpose in an organization, and you have people who you've attracted that are absolutely attracted to purpose and redefining themselves, that is cognitive dissonance, and you've got a challenge. So one of the things that we're starting to use that data with now is to sit down with our people team to say, we really can't do anything from a marketing perspective that cannot be authentically true and lived, because redefining people will not tolerate well in that space. So it's really starting to give us an understanding of our organizational culture, which is super exciting to us because it's another sort of data source for us to be able to kind of share. But I think from my perspective, discovering stages with Terry O'Fallon and Bill Torbett, I was really fortunate enough, as I say. Bill Torbett at the time didn't have very good marketing about 10 years ago, and I was able to go to a 3-day workshop with him where there was only about 10 of us that turned up. And it was just, I guess, the first introduction to this whole kind of concept of understanding our capacity for complexity in the way we currently think. Also helps us really design well. So we can look at sort of the general center of gravity of the cohort and start to think about how we design the workouts with adaptation in particular. It's incredible, and I think what's exciting. It's just such an early stage for us to explore. So we run lots of experiments. So again, taking an adaptive design approach, we run experiments with it.
Fantastic. That point you made around the cognitive dissonance, I think it's a really interesting one. One thing that I noticed, I've done sort of VMI debriefs across a number of different countries and companies, of course. And something that comes up quite a bit is you have people that might be in a redefining, so they're in that stage of their life for people's benefit where they're really asking questions about what is my purpose, what am I really here for, what's the impact I can have, the deep, challenging questions that make you uncomfortable. The question is more important than the answer, in fact, because it's the question that opens up a new avenue for exploration.
Yeah.
But then when I ask them about their context, I see something very different. So they've got a strong redefining profile, but what they often talk about is something quite different. It's down towards the achiever, expert, which is fine. There's no judgment. These are all, it's all about how you apply your range and context of course, Sam, which you're well aware of. But I often say what I hear is how you're operating and how you're thinking is one thing, but your profile's showing something else. What might explain that? And they'll say, well, I don't bring that to work.
Mm.
And they're talking about redefining. I don't bring that to work. It's not what my organization requires of me. And so it puts them in quite an uncomfortable place at times where they're not able to be who they are. They're not able to really explore their mindset in the environment that they're in. I think you're right that that's not sustainable necessarily. If you can't offer people a culture that's aligned with, the mindset that they're bringing in,
Yeah.
it's probably not sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And I think, maybe that's, something to do with people not feeling that they could live a full integrated life at the
Yeah,
organisation. And I think that this is where we are seeing choice, people making choices.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally, totally. Great question here from Devon. We've got a few minutes left. Maybe just to talk quickly about resilience, because I know you've got an interesting
Mm.
take on that. Thanks, Devon.
Thanks, Devon. Yeah, so again, I've been sort of doing a bit of exploration over the last couple of years. Through COVID, we had an opportunity to do a bit of have some international thought leaders come and speak to us because I, I worked out that they might have had a disrupted model. So reached out to a few of the international business schools, and they were able to. We were able to do some virtual conversations. And gentleman that we came across was Dr. Srini Pillay at Duke Corporate Ed that had done a huge amount of work to take Nassim Taleb's book on anti-fragility, if you haven't heard of that before, and apply it to the human the human psyche and the human spirit. And basically, sort of anti-fragility talks about, as opposed to resilience, which we're all well and truly, I'm sure, across, is about sort of, the bouncing back from kind of a challenge or a threat, or, resilience being coming back to that position point. But anti-fragility really speaks to having a mindset that is about becoming stronger by leaning into the adversity. And so we're again, it's sort of something we're holding a bit lightly in our leadership development conversations, but it's around how do I grow an anti-fragile mindset to think about some of these challenges that are being thrown at me and will inevitably thrown at me throughout my whole duration of my life, and think about it as a way to I'm actually going to grow and develop through this. What is
Yeah,
this challenge presenting me with as an opportunity to grow as a human being? And so, how do we kind of create this mindset throughout our leaders and our organisation, which is really exciting, And I just want to acknowledge it is not in denial of people who will be, you know, who may be suffering from some other, kind of mental health. This is not for that. It
yeah,
is not in denial of any of that. But if we just take this from a leadership development kind of heat experience perspective, every opportunity is an opportunity to grow. Someone said to me years ago, I think it was more Dr. Demartini's quote, but if you think about an upset is also a setup to
yeah,
grow and develop into something else. So how do we kind of create that mindset across our leaders in particular to say, okay, here we go. What
yeah,
is being
yeah,
called of me for my inner development sort of work now? What part of myself that is ready for the next exploration to grow?
great.
So it's pretty cool, and it's early days. So if you've got any thoughts on it, get on board because, and I've just actually been sent a psychology journal research piece from a buddy. So it's starting to get a bit more mainstream, which is pretty cool.
Fantastic. No, thanks for that. And you brought us maybe in conclusion back to that self-leadership and how relevant that anti-fragility really is for self-leadership and adaptive challenges. So thanks for that. Sam, just want to say thanks so much for joining us. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Great way for you and I to start the day. Thanks everyone for coming. Also, just to mention that if you want to see more of Sam and I, which of course you do, we're going to be hosting the Leadership Development Incubator in Melbourne on the 24th and 25th of July. There's a note just gone into the chat from Devon. So it'll be Sam and myself. We'll have Carl Sanders Edwards and Nick Petrie as well. It's going to be really, really interesting, a lot of fun. So hope by all means reach out to me or follow the link if you'd like to learn more. Yeah, Sam, thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much. Great conversation. Really, really appreciate these opportunities to be in dialogue with awesome peers. So go well, everybody. You're doing awesome work. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great day or night.